soldier of God, a man of faith and family. He was born and raised in Pinar del Rio, Cuba, and despite showing an interest in boxing, his father guided him to wrestling. Yoel's older brother, Yoel Hernandez, was a successful amateur and professional boxer, taking gold at the World Junior Championships, silver at the Pan American Games, and he was also an IBF and Ring Magazine Cruiserweight title holder. Yoel Romero would also compete in the Pan American Games the same year as his brother in 2003, but in freestyle wrestling, taking home a gold medal. In summary, Yoel was a 1999 world champion, 2000 Olympic Games silver medalist, 2-time Cuban Olympic team member, 6-time world level medalist, 2-time World Cup champion, 2003 Pan Am Games champion, and a 5-time Pan American champion. In 2007, Yoel Romero defected to Germany, where he began his MMA training and his professional debut in 2009, fighting a total of 5 times, with all wins by KO before signing to Strikeforce. Yoel made his Strikeforce debut at light heavyweight against Rafael Cavalcante in 2011. An interesting fight from Yoel, taking a very reserved approach in the first round, staying light on his feet and moving on the outside. You can see right away how agile Yoel is. His movements are quick, especially for a light heavyweight at the time. And if one didn't know better, you'd think he's a welterweight. After a very lackluster first round, Yoel came out strong in the second, swarming Feijiao, Eddie Alvarez style. Yoel would eventually get tagged with the spinning back fist that eventually led to him being knocked out, forcing referee Dan Miragliotta to stop the fight. A few takeaways from this fight is Yoel's movement on the outside, his failed takedown attempt, being taken down, Yoel's flying knee, and also Rafael's body kick. Yoel would sit out for about 2 years citing injuries, and during this time Strikeforce was acquired by the UFC. I'm assuming Yoel's contract was transferred over, and I'm also assuming he had moved to the US to train full-time at ATT in Coconut Creek, Florida. His first fight in 2 years, his first fight in the UFC, and his first fight at middleweight is against Clifford Starks in April of 2013. Once again, Romero displaying a very loose, relaxed style while staying on the outside. This time, he flirts with side kicks, one to the leg, one to the head, and suddenly, like a kangaroo, Romero seems to almost levitate off the ground and knees Cliff right in the face. Cliff goes down, Romero follows up, fight over. 7 months later, Romero is matched up against Hani Marks for UFC Fight Night for the troops in Kentucky. Marks is a BJJ black belt, and he trained at Novo União. First round, Romero is light on his feet, leg kicks, front leg, side kicks, teeps. Hani's looking for a lot of body kicks since it's an open guard matchup. Hani catches a kick and takes Romero down, but he fails to control Romero on the ground and he was back to his feet quickly. After that, Romero gave Hani a lot of looks, keeping his back against the fence, then penetrates with the left straight down the pipe. This is certainly Romero's go-to attack and is common for southpaws against orthodox. We began to see the creativity of Romero in this fight, these weird upward backhands and the side kicks. The creativity does come at a cost when Hani secures a body lock and takes him down. Nonetheless, Hani's decision to go for a submission before position allows Romero to stand up again. At the end of the second round, Hani does land a good punch that rocks Romero a little. He doesn't knock him down, but you can tell he was dazed. Takeaways from this fight is Romero getting tagged in the pocket, he was taken down, hit with kicks to the body, but we saw more creativity from him. Good straight left hands, punches to the body, his cardio looked good too, and great varying speeds in his attacks. Romero's next fight, and probably one of the more important ones to reference, was against 3-time Division II All-American wrestler Derek Brunson. Great mix of everything here, and an excellent display of Romero's heart. The guy gets kicked in the head and eats it, no problem. The stand-up is a little different in this fight because Derek stands southpaw like Romero. He was able to take him down and work to full mount, which is significant because we're going to see that style of grappling from Weidman. Chris should be able to match the wrestling, but the jiu-jitsu game will be on another level than Brunson's, and probably Romero's. This was a really good fight and it highlights how underrated Brunson was at the time. Good back and forth, but when the third round came, it seemed Brunson was a little more fatigued. Romero looked very well conditioned in the third, his upper body movement was excellent, and he really started putting the pressure on. Once again, great resilience, technique, and athleticism from Romero. His next fight against Brad Tavares, we really get to see Romero's entire game. A lot of takedowns, good counter-striking, and head movement. Romero was simply better than Tavares, and that's what it came down to, although Tavares is tough as hell. Next fight was against Tim Kennedy, a very interesting fight. Pretty even as far as grappling, but Tim had nothing on Romero's stand-up for the first 2 rounds, except for when Tim grabbed Romero's glove and smashed him. Romero was basically out on his feet. Then the whole Stoolgate thing took place. But when the third round started, Romero landed a beautiful sequence and eventually finished Tim Kennedy. This was the first fight where it looked like Romero was a little more sluggish than usual, but still, even being a little fatigued and rocked, he's dangerous as hell. Thing to note, that was Romero's first fight in Las Vegas, and in my opinion, a contributing factor to his cardio. Romero has looked fine in 3-round fights up to this point, but Vegas was different. Look at Romero's next fight against Machida, which took place in Florida. Another 3-round fight, and he didn't look bad at all. Got the finish on Machida by smashing his face in the 3rd round. But against Jacare, his latest fight, Romero once again looked a little more sluggish than what he looked like in past fights. Both the Kennedy fight and the Jacare fight took place in Las Vegas. Both fights he looked sluggish. Maybe that's a coincidence, but I think we see the same with many fighters, especially international ones. It doesn't happen to all of them, but some I do believe it does. The fight against Jacare was interesting, especially the first round. I like Jacare's shot selection against Romero, as well as his pressure, but he lacked head movement and sometimes setup. Romero capitalized on this eventually. It was back and forth, but Romero walked away with a controversial split decision. With 2 controversial victories, his poor choice of words when talking about gays and Jesus, Romero isn't exactly on the fans' good side, which I think has resulted in some unfair criticism about him. Kind of similar to what's happening to Woodley and to a lesser extent Eddie Alvarez. But it doesn't quite make sense. Out of 7 3-round fights, Romero has looked kind of fatigued in 2 of them. Tim Kennedy and Jacare, and Romero finished Kennedy. How would he fare in a 5-round fight? That's still up for debate. But to say his cardio is bad, I think that's false. Against Chris Weidman, we'll be looking at 15 minutes, and he's not fighting in Las Vegas, so I do anticipate Romero to look how he usually does, well-conditioned and always dangerous.
Yoel is probably most dangerous at mid-range. If he's given space to work, it allows him time to set up shots and stay unpredictable. If things don't go his way, he's more than happy to find the takedown. He's mostly dangerous on top, effective from the guard and a half guard. He's dangerous in the first round, does have 5 first-round knockouts, but he also has 5 third-round knockouts. In the UFC, 2 of his fights have gone the distance, and 5 have been knockout or TKOs, 4 in the 3rd round and 1 in the 1st. He's dangerous every minute of the fight. If someone can handle a dangerous, explosive, elite-level athlete whose composure and confidence may be intimidating, it's probably Chris Weidman. Born and raised in New York, Weidman was a cadet freestyle and Greco-Roman All-American. He became a 2-time All-American at Nassau Community College, then transferred to Hofstra, where he was a 2-time Division I All-American. Chris then trained BJJ at Matt Serra's academy, and after 3 months of training, he won the East Coast Grapplers Quest Absolute Division, and I do believe he won in his own division as well. After a year of training, he made it to the ADCC quarterfinals in 2009, losing to Andre Galvao, who's a seasoned and credentialed grappler. Not bad for a wrestler with only a year of BJJ. Chris also made his MMA debut in 2009, winning the Ring of Combat middleweight title in his 3rd fight against Uriah Hall. He defended his title once in 2010, then signed to the UFC, with his first fight in March of 2011 against Alessio Sakara, fight Chris took on 2 weeks' notice with an injured rib. Weidman basically out-wrestled and out-grappled him to win that fight, but Alessio was in it the whole time. What I remember most is the body shots Weidman absorbed. He showed good pressure, good leg kicks. Alessio showed good work to the body and head. We get to see the glimpse of how much Weidman likes head and arm control. If anything worked for Alessio in this fight, it was definitely the combinations he threw. Now his next fight is against Jesse Water Bongfeld, which is the best nickname in UFC history. The first southpaw Chris faces in the UFC too. Chris gets smacked early with a kick to the face, great timing by Bongfeld, but it really was just more of a slap more than anything, but it certainly got Chris's attention. Jesse tries to swarm him but ends up clinching. Chris gets over under and tries to lateral drop, but Jesse kind of lands on top, and Chris is able to still hold that underhook though and get to side control. Chris comes in with the knee to the body, and Bongfeld catches the right leg, and you can see he's thinking of going for the single leg, his head on the outside, and Weidman cinches up a standing guillotine. Very opportunistic of Chris Weidman. Side note, if Eddie Alvarez is looking for the single leg off Conor's southpaw stance, this is something to be aware of because McGregor with his reach can cinch this choke in too if Alvarez keeps his head on the outside. Weidman would go on to fight another southpaw in Filthy Tom Lawler, the second southpaw Chris faces. Tom Lawler steps in, Chris throws an overhand, which is a disguise for him to grab the leg. Chris goes in for the single, turns the corner and drives forward for the double. Side note, this is what Alvarez might look to do against McGregor. Weidman likes to be in side control because oftentimes when they try to shrimp out, Weidman uses this to get some kind of headlock position, usually head and arm, to try and get the darce or a high elbow, guillotine, something of that nature. That's exactly what happens to Tom Lawler here. Weidman sinks in the Darce choke and Lawler goes out. And this is the most dangerous part of grappling with Weidman, is he is so good at controlling the upper body, threatening with submissions. So there's 2 victories against southpaws, and the UFC throws another southpaw against Weidman, and it's another fight on short notice against Demian Maia. He's really slow, quite sluggish in this fight. In the second round, Weidman baits Maia's left hand and uses that opportunity to duck under and secure body lock takedown right into side control. Maia is able to get the whizzer, he's back to his feet, but that was an opportunity for him to look for the Darce if he gets that position again, which he does. Near the end of the second round, Weidman once again gets the body lock and drops Maia. If this hadn't have been the end of the round, we may have seen Weidman tap out Demian Maia with the guillotine. And that's incredible, knowing who Demian Maia is. Weidman would go on to win that fight via unanimous decision. Chris's next fight is now against someone orthodox again, Mark Munoz. Not much of a different strategy starting out. Chris tries to get Mark to think high, throws a kick to the head to get his hands up. It works because the next thing Chris does is dive in for a deep, high-crotched double leg and moves to side control. He knows Weidman will look for head control, so he does a good job of controlling him. Completely dominant first round by Weidman. In the second round, we see Munoz bull rushing forward, which is very interesting. I'm not sure what his game plan was in that fight. It might have been just to pressure him, get his back to the fence, but Weidman is just going to change levels and look for the takedown or counter with punches. We see more of the same, Weidman putting his arm around the neck, looking for the front headlock position. Now, although the elbow was great, it really was the groundwork of Weidman on display in this fight. The transitions from threat to threat, making Munoz defend and work, roll and scramble. It worked perfectly. It makes a fighter panic on the feet because they need to try to win that round back in some way. They have to work against the clock, and they have to do something convincing. And that's kind of what happened to Munoz in this fight. And in just 5 UFC fights, they award Weidman the opportunity to fight one of the best fighters to ever walk into the octagon. And it's a middleweight title fight. And this is a good fight to reference when looking at Romero, simply because of the relaxation that Anderson Silva brings and the fluidity on the feet. Silva is much better and more of a lethal striker than Romero in my opinion, but still, the confidence Silva brings reflects that of Romero in some ways. In the first round, Weidman gets him down, but it isn't just wrestling him like Chael did. Weidman rolls with Silva. That's how comfortable he is against any caliber of grappler. In my opinion, there isn't much to analyze on the feet other than the speed and mobility of Silva. It did give Weidman a little trouble because he's not quite as agile or fast as Silva, but he stayed in his face, kept to basics, and when the opportunity presented itself, he used his reach and he knocked Silva out. In the rematch, it was more the same. Less showboating, of course, and Weidman basically knocked Silva out in the clinch. Silva broke his leg in that fight when Weidman checked his kick. Up to this point, Weidman had fought 5 southpaws, including Silva twice. And it doesn't stop there. He's matched up with Lyoto Machida next, another southpaw. And this was a battle of feints and footwork for the first 2 rounds, both having success with body kicks. Machida was most successful in this fight with pressure and combinations. Same with Weidman, his kicks, pressure, and takedowns won him that fight. Weidman also worked pretty well in the clinch, a good back and forth battle from there. Near the end, the last 2 rounds, we see a crazy Lyoto Machida using a lot of pressure and combinations. Weidman shells up in these situations. He did it against Vitor Belfort too. Weidman won by unanimous decision. Vitor Belfort was a short story. Vitor lands a punch, and then he goes wild. Weidman shells up and avoids many of the shots. Weidman gets deep on the takedown, passes to mount, and pounds Vitor's face in. The fight with Luke Rockhold was interesting. Great elbows by Chris on the inside, and Luke Rockhold is a big guy. This was a different style than Chris has fought in the past. Rockhold did very well timing when Chris was coming in for the takedown, and he countered that effectively. They both traded heavy body kicks. The conclusion of this fight is Weidman trying to do spinning shit, and Luke taking full advantage of that mistake. Rockhold gets Chris's back right away, gets the hooks in, then moves to full mount, and starts beating Chris Weidman down. Chris doesn't look the same in round 4, very sluggish, very slow. It takes all his energy to defend the takedown by Luke, but he gets it, and he continues to punch him until Herb stops the fight. There's a lot to consider in this fight with Yoel Romero, but let's keep it general. Weidman is 2 inches taller, he has a 5-inch reach advantage, and he's 7 years younger. When there is this minimum of 7 years age difference, the younger fighter wins 63% of the time, according to BetMMA.tips. He has a higher takedown accuracy and defense. This will be the 5th southpaw in a row Weidman has faced and 8th in total out of 10 UFC fights. Yoel is a little better defensively on the feet than Weidman at 62%, and absorbs 1 less significant strike than him. However, we've seen Yoel rocked or dazed more often than we have from Weidman. I think Yoel's best chance here is to try and hold the center of the octagon and throw in combinations, which is going to be difficult against someone with a 5-inch reach advantage, but Yoel is very explosive. Since this is a 3-round fight, he's going to want to win rounds with takedowns. Yoel can certainly knock Weidman out, but I have a hard time believing he's going to be able to with his style. Yoel has only one first-round knockout in the UFC, the rest of his fights have gone to the 3rd round. I think if Yoel wins, it's probably going to be by decision and less likely by knockout. For Weidman, he also needs to pressure Yoel and limit the space to work. I'd like to see him press him against the cage and work elbows like he did against Rockhold. Plus, with the leverage Weidman will have, he should be able to smash him from there. Then, if he can, get Yoel to the ground. I think Weidman is going to have a significant advantage grappling with him. If he can constantly make Yoel defend, he'll wear him out or catch him with a submission. I think it's likely Chris wins a number of ways here, and I think the most likely is probably by decision since Yoel is very strong and probably is able to survive by scrambling to get to better positions. Weidman can win this by TKO, landing something heavy in the pocket or the clinch, or maybe on the mat. And of course, I think Weidman can get this by submission, because his jiu-jitsu is likely much better than Yoel's. Working with John Danaher and the crew over at Renzo Gracie's, Ricardo's, working with Ryan Hall, you're hard-pressed to find a better grappling team to roll with. I say pick your poison with Weidman. Striking at range is going to probably be the most interesting aspect of this fight because Yoel can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. He can also bleed the clock on the mat if he's able to control Weidman on the ground. Although Yoel is rather unpredictable on the feet, there are a couple things Weidman can definitely expect, and that's a flying knee. Yoel does it almost every fight. You'll have to watch for the head kicks Weidman likes to open with in the following takedown attempt. I don't think Yoel's cardio will be an issue at all unless this fight is very, very grappling intensive. Yoel will likely be well conditioned like he usually is. Interesting fight, leave your picks down below and follow me on Twitter at RapidMMA.